Well, joining us now, we have NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. We have Michael Crowley, New York Times diplomatic correspondent, and here in the studio with me, Richard Haass, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations and author of the weekly Substack newsletter, Home and Away. Gentlemen, welcome all. Vaughn, you first here. What's the president hoping to get out of this meeting? And a big picture from Netanyahu going forward.
Benjamin Netanyahu has effectively been allowed to operationalize his war in Gaza with no constraints attempted by this White House and by this Trump administration over the last 7 months. Even if you go back to February, you'll recall that press conference in which President Trump, standing next to Benjamin Netanyahu, suggested that they could go as far as to having the American forces help, quote, take over Gaza. But that is a far departure from where we find ourselves here today in this fourth White House meeting. And Benjamin Netanyahu has heard directly from the American president, even suggests explicitly that Israel should not be allowed to annex the occupied West Bank here. This is a moment in which Netanyahu, as he did Friday while speaking at the UN General Assembly, suggested that Western nations have buckled in his terms and that Israel will not let up and that it will not ultimately back off its war that it has continued to wage until all hostages are returned. He has also suggested that it was disgraceful, suggestions that there should be a Palestinian state. And that is where, though, Israel finds itself increasingly isolated. And President Trump, with this 21-point plan, which has been being shepherded by Steve Witkoff, this was first presented to a series of Arab nations early last week, and it would, in the event that Hamas were to agree to disarm, which there has been no indication that they would be willing to do that, and in an agreement with the turning over of the remaining hostages to Israel, that Israel would in turn have to agree to removing IDF forces from Gaza. And so this is a big departure from the longstanding position under the Netanyahu government that Israeli security forces must remain. So there is a big gap coming into this meeting. We should note that they have been, the two men now inside the West Wing, for more than 40 minutes, and which is atypical. We typically see a camera there shoot those initial moments of these meetings between President Trump and other foreign leaders. That didn't happen this go-around, and there's a question here if a press conference is held this afternoon, will there be progress made? It's a big question here, knowing that the President, Trump, has given Netanyahu a big leash over the course of these first 7 months in the White House.
Yep, and indeed that gap that he is referencing there extends beyond just what's happening in the White House, because the UN provided quite a dramatic illustration of Israel's growing isolation with dozens of diplomats. You see him there walking out on Netanyahu during his speech on Friday. It was pretty dramatic. How precarious is his position, Michael, and what does he hope to get out of today's meeting?
Well, Israel is extremely embattled right now on the world stage. International anger at Israel is at a peak, at least in my lifetime, I believe. Richard could correct me with more of a historical perspective, but at the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu has a very valuable ally in President Trump. Having an American president who has given him the enormous leeway that Trump has is hugely useful to him, and I think allows him to have this degree of defiance toward the international community, which is outraged that Israel is destroying so much of Gaza, has committed so many civilian casualties there. What I think that Netanyahu wants to get out of this meeting is number one, just not to have any friction with the president, to survive the press conference, to agree with Trump as much as possible. I suspect that Netanyahu does not want this peace plan, does not want this Trump plan. It's not clear that he wants an end to the war at all. It's also not clear that Hamas does, and there's no trust between these two sides. So I think when it comes to this plan to end the fighting in Gaza, you'll hear Netanyahu continue to say supportive things, as he did in that soundbite, possibly with the expectation that later on the plan will fall apart or he can shift his position and basically not be committed to it. And the last thing I'll say, I think that is very important to him, is this question of annexation of the West Bank. and to avoid any explicit disagreement with the president. I think that Netanyahu is probably trying to convince President Trump that there's some way Israel can proceed to do this, possibly partial annexation, not a complete annexation, doing it in a kind of quieter, less dramatic way. And that's very important to the right-wing politicians in Israel who keep Netanyahu in power. So I think Netanyahu is probably looking for a way to bridge this difference with President Trump and get him to accept some kind of annexation while also avoiding a public disagreement in that all-important press conference.
You know, Michael, I have Richard here in studio, and I was watching him nod in agreement to much of what you were saying. So expand on why you were nodding. I mean, does he put a good summary of that? Do you expect much to come from this meeting?
Well, I think from the Israeli point of view, they'd rather not be blamed for a breakdown. So, and then even if there were to be an Israeli agreement, you still have to get Hamas. And then much more important is implementation. You actually read the 21-point plan, which I have. You know, Swiss cheese is what comes to mind. It is very vague when it comes to the particulars about security arrangements, about timing, lots of use of the word gradually.
Yeah.
Extremely vague on the idea of where this is going to lead or not lead politically in terms of satisfying Palestinian aspirations.
If it's vague, doesn't that make it likelier to be implemented by Netanyahu because it's not specific?
Well, it means it might be more likely to be agreed to rather than, than implemented. But it still would require him to sign on in principle to certain things like ending the war and so forth. And that might be too much for his coalition partners. So again, I think but my guess is he's going to want to appear to meet the president at least halfway. My guess is he won't go ahead with annexation right now to the extent the president reinforces that's a line. But there's all sorts of things the prime minister of Israel can do that you might call de facto annexation. For example, he could expand the number of settlements in the West Bank. So nothing has been quote unquote annexed, but what it really means is more land has been given to Israeli settlers and essentially taken off the table from any potential Palestinian state.
So with regard to Donald Trump, though, again, these are the two that are meeting and talking about this, presumably over lunch, if they're sticking to their schedule right now. Donald Trump has specifically said, we want this war to end. He has expressed his desire to expand what he accomplished during his first term in reaching the Abraham Accords. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Let's look at that for sure. So the kind of leverage that he holds over Netanyahu to get this done is what? Given particularly the isolation that Israel is feeling.
Bibi Netanyahu is not the most popular man in Israel. Donald Trump is. So Trump has a lot of standing in Israel, particularly after the United States got involved in the attacks on the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. The United States is still very important to Israel on the security side. Plus, you just mentioned the UN. Well, what would happen if there were resolutions introduced into the UN Security Council and President Trump said to Bibi Netanyahu, hey, you can't count on us to veto these resolutions? That would be an enormous piece of leverage. So the real question is, will President Trump signal to Bibi Netanyahu there will be consequences if you do certain things or don't do other things? Because at risk, by the way, you mentioned the Abraham Accords, which were a significant achievement of Donald Trump's first term. They're at risk here. And there's already reports that United Arab Emirates, which was the key country in those accords, would potentially pull back from them if Israel goes ahead with annexation.
But when you say that Donald Trump is more popular than Bibi Netanyahu, the fact is that polling, according to Netanyahu, within Israel suggests that Israelis are not in favor of the idea of Palestinian statehood, right? Polling makes the case that they don't want it. So is there a limit to how much he can bend to Trump's will for his own domestic policies?
No one's asking anyone to negotiate a Palestinian state today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. This is down the road and then down some.
So don't focus on that now.
Right. That's really a political symbol. The real question is, what are the terms for ending the war in Gaza? Who can maintain security there? And what, if any, political process is launched?
So, Michael, look, we are seeing leaders across Europe and the Arab world. They are aligning behind some of the key concepts of this 21-point peace plan, among them being the immediate ceasefire and the return of all the hostages. But beyond that, what does a reasonable day-after plan look like? What is realistically possible?
Well, realistically is the key word here, because any of these plans is going to face enormous obstacles. Obviously, you're talking about a devastated territory with a traumatized population, likely with remnants, very likely with remnants of radical fighters. Whatever Hamas may agree to as an organization, you're going to have very angry, very radicalized people in Gaza who are going to be looking for revenge and to wreak havoc, and who are going to reject any surrender of Hamas power. But the idea, which the Biden administration began working on, a couple years ago or a year plus ago, is that you would have some kind of multinational Arab Muslim force come in. You would have a transitional government with security forces, and gradually turn over control of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, which now runs the West Bank and cooperates and basically coexists uneasily with Israel. And then you begin the reconstruction. But it's an enormous task, and there are a lot of conservative leaders in Israel who aren't really interested in that. I think they feel like, forget it. After October 7th, we're never letting Gaza have autonomy, Palestinians have autonomy in Gaza again. And moreover, many of the conservatives in Netanyahu's coalition, I believe, want to begin settling Gaza and returning Israelis into Gaza, where they had been before, I believe it was a 2000 withdrawal. So it's an enormous task. We're far from it, but that's what theoretically it could look like.
On the Holman investigation, I mean, can you just speak to, did the president ask the Justice Department to close the case, and does Holman have to return the $50,000?
Well, Mr. Holman never took the $50,000 that you're referring to, so you should get your facts straight, number one. Number two, this was another example of the weaponization of the Biden Department of Justice against one of President Trump's strongest and most vocal supporters in the midst of a presidential campaign. You had FBI agents going undercover to try and entrap one of the president's top allies and supporters, someone who they knew very well would be taking a government position months later. Mr. Holman did absolutely nothing wrong, and even the President's Department of Justice, even Kash Patel's FBI, looked into this just to make sure. They had a number of different prosecutors and FBI agents who looked into this. They found zero evidence of illegal activity or criminal wrongdoing in the White House, and the president stand by Tom Homan 100% because he did absolutely nothing wrong, and he is a brave public servant who has done a phenomenal job in helping the president shut down the border.
That was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt last week telling reporters to get their facts straight about the FBI's investigation into border czar Tom Homan for a cash for contracts scheme. It was first reported by MSNBC. Now MSNBC has ironed out more of those details on how Homan became a part of that FBI sting. 4 sources familiar with the investigation and a government document reviewed by MSNBC say Homan was not entrapped by undercover FBI agents, as Leavitt suggested, but rather that those agents were repeatedly steered to Homan by one of his own associates. Julian Jace Calderas, a former U.S. immigration official who worked under Homan in the Obama administration, allegedly proposed to the agents who were posing as businessmen that Homan could help them win lucrative federal contracts if Donald Trump became president again, in exchange for $1 million. Calderas first allegedly proposed the scheme in May 2023 and continued to do so for more than a year until that September 2024 meeting in Dallas, where agents allegedly recorded Homan accepting $50,000 in cash. Instead of immediately moving to file charges, those agents waited to see what would happen after Homan joined the Trump administration as the nation's top immigration official. But when Donald Trump won, his DOJ shut the whole investigation down. The White House has criticized the investigation as a politically motivated inquiry by the Biden administration, and Homan has denied he did anything wrong. Joining us now, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, MSNBC Senior Investigative Correspondent Carol Leonnig, and MSNBC Senior Political and National Correspondent Jacob Soboroff. Carol, first off, did I get all that correct? And can you walk us through a little bit more of your sourcing?
Yeah, I was pretty impressed because we broke this story a few minutes ago and you got everything right, Katie. an associate of Tom Homan's who had worked with him in ICE at a much lower position than Tom Homan, a man named Julian Calderas, had approached these undercover agents, been introduced to them as part of a different investigation, and several times from 2023 through 2024, Mr. Calderas, according to a document we've reviewed and multiple sources, multiple times proposed Tom Homan can get you contracts. And in May 2023, he proposed a scheme, according to the FBI, whereby if for $1 million, Homan could get them contracts, and continued proposing that to the point that the FBI concluded they had to begin investigating Tom Homan for potential bribery.
So, Ken, what happened to this investigation again once Donald Trump won?
Well, they took no further investigative steps, is our information, Katie, and it ultimately was closed not very long ago after it was briefed by career Justice Department officials to members of the Trump administration. And when I was listening to Caroline Levitt there, something struck me that she said that I didn't hear before. She said the FBI agents knew very well that Tom Homan would be taking a job in the Trump administration. That's not true. This happened in September 2024, according to our reporting. So they had no idea who was going to win the election at that time. They were just following the investigation where it took them. Again, as Carol said, they were on a separate investigation, and they came across Calderas, and he steers them to Homan. And that was essentially how they got on to Tom Homan and began scrutinizing him. Remember, at the time, he had served in the first Trump administration, and he was working as a consultant and as a lobbyist, essentially accepting money to help steer contracts. That's not illegal. But what the FBI agents heard during this meeting led some people in the Justice Department to think that they could file charges right then and there. And one of the charges at issue was conspiracy to commit bribery. And it's interesting, when we broke our first story, some legal commentators said, well, you can't conspire with federal agents, so where's the conspiracy? Well, this would have been a factor in the calculations as to whether there could be a criminal conspiracy, because now you have two people accepting money at this meeting, two people working together saying that Tom Homan will take money to steer contracts, Katie.
So why did the agents end up waiting? I mean, Caroline Levitt says they knew very well that he would get a job, but as you mentioned, this was back in September. If it was still very much up in the air about whether Donald Trump would win, as it was in September, why did they wait?
Well, our understanding is there was a debate about that, as there often is on these cases within the FBI and the Justice Department, and the consensus prevailed that it would be a stronger case and an actual bribery charge, potentially, if Tom Homan actually got this senior job that people thought he was going to get. Well, first, Donald Trump had to win. He won. And then actually fulfilled this allegedly corrupt agreement that he made during this meeting. And so they wanted to watch and wait. And they had lots of probable cause at that point to take further investigative steps, which may have included wiretaps or all kinds of intrusive things that the FBI needs evidence to actually undertake against the target of an investigation. But again, none of that happened, because as soon as this was briefed to the Trump administration, it was on ice, as we understand it.
So, Jacob, tell me a little bit about Tom Homan and the intervening years between his first stint in the administration and why it was believed that he would be somebody who would definitely get a job in this second term, if there was one.
Well, he has been a career operator within the Department of Homeland Security for many years, including in the Obama administration, where he was a senior official in ICE and recognized by the Obama administration for his work there. Remember, he first proposed the family separation policy, was part of the team that did that during the Obama administration. It was rejected out of hand and then adopted once he became part of the Trump administration in early 2017. Tom Homan made no secret after Donald Trump lost the election to Joe Biden that he wanted to return to government with Donald Trump. And, I spent time with Tom Homan out here in L.A. in advance of these wide-scale mass deportation raids that have been playing out all through the summer and now into the fall. But I also crossed paths with Tom Homan before that, as he was making very clear, very publicly, that he wanted to rejoin Donald Trump in his effort to institute the largest mass deportation policy in American history. When Errol Morris and I made that documentary, Separated, based on my book about the family separation policy, Tom Homan showed up in person to an interview with Errol Morris outside of Boston and actually actually left before the interview was set to take place. We still don't know why, but we put in the film some of the things that he was saying around that time, including, and it's in Carolyn Kenn's latest piece of extraordinary reporting, if he comes back, I come back. He kept saying that over and over again about Donald Trump. When I reported from the floor of the Republican National Convention, I had text message exchanges with Tom Homan asking him about the rumors that he would become the Secretary of Homeland Security, S1, as they call it within the department. And he sent me back a smiley face emoji wearing sunglasses. But then when Donald Trump became president of the United States, and I think this reporting by Carolyn Kenn raises an extraordinary question, why didn't he become that job? And I guess we don't fully know the answer to it, but what we do know through this reporting is that this investigation, these interactions with federal agents were taking place. And ultimately, of course, Tom Homan didn't become the Secretary of Homeland Security. He got this informal role as the border czar, where he has shown up now around the country as this dream that he and Donald Trump and Stephen Miller have said that they wanted to execute, this mass deportation policy, has unfolded, and he has remained central throughout all of this.
Yeah, let me play a little bit of Tom Homan's reaction to your initial reporting. Here he is talking about how he came into the administration on Newsmax. This was last week on September 24th.
Day one of the administration, when President Trump asked me to come back and we entered on duty, I met with ethics attorneys, and by law, you're supposed to recuse yourself from any company you had affiliations with before. But I took it a step further. I recused myself from all federal contracts. I won't have any decision-making in any federal contract, but people, including this recent case, people are saying, I'm going to line the pockets of people. I signed that declaration. I do not make decisions in any federal contracts. And just so people know, I make about 18% of what I've made in my company to come back and serve my nation. So my family's taken a sacrifice. I've taken a sacrifice. I'm back here doing the right thing. The hit pieces keep coming, but I know who's chumming the water. I know who keeps throwing this information out, and the media jumps all over it. And they're going to see some legal actions real soon. I'm working with a legal team. I'm done with it. They can attack me all they want, but we're going to take action.
Carol, any other comment to this updated reporting?
I think it's just really important to underscore, Katie, and Ken and Jacob do a great job of keying off these essential points. But Tom Homan has not yet once denied taking $50,000 in cash as recorded by the FBI per the documents we reviewed. And now we have another individual, a close ICE associate of his, who worked with him, who we have identified through documents and sources, who accepted $10,000 in cash at the same meeting. And there are questions that are flying around. Where is that money? Why is Tom Homan not denying that he took this cash?
Did Calderas comment on this story? Has Homan commented on this story?
I reached Calderas on the phone, and he said he knows nothing about this, and if any of what I've said to him on the phone is accurate, he needs to talk to his lawyer. He hung up, and we've not spoken since, and he's not responded to MSNBC's requests for comment in multiple places.
All right, so the FBI declined to comment for the story, and Trump officials at the Justice Department did not respond to requests for comment. You can read the full story on MSNBC.com. Carol, Ken, thank you for your reporting. Jacob, thank you for your context.
Meeting of military leaders who have been summoned from command posts all around the world by Pete Hegseth to hear his 1 hour long take on, quote, warrior ethos is, if you can believe it, sounding even more weird by the hour. Yesterday, Donald Trump told NBC News that he will now be attending the meeting. Trump said this, quote, it's really just a very nice meeting, talking about how well we're doing militarily, talking about being in great shape, talking about a lot of good positive things. It's just a good message. We have some great people coming in, and it's just an esprit de corps. You know the expression esprit de corps, that's all it's about. We're talking about what we're doing, what they're doing, and how we're doing. Exactly what one would want the person with the nuclear launch codes to say about the reason he summoned every military leader to a single meeting in one room. Washington Post is reporting that the event will cost millions of dollars, that it raises military security concerns, and that it runs the risk of leaving top military leaders stranded. Quote, it is estimated that flying, lodging, and transporting all the military leaders, some of whom will be traveling from the Mideast, Europe, and the Indo-Pacific, will cost millions. The event has also raised security concerns about having all the top leadership in one place, particularly given that Tuesday is the end of the fiscal year, and if the government shuts down, it could leave key personnel stranded from their units. Joining our coverage, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Claire's still with us. General Hertling, tell me how you're thinking about this and what, I mean, I think people understand that of all members of the government and of our society, the military is literally structured up the chain of command. And so if summoned, they must come. But how would you feel if you were and your family were halfway around the world and you were summoned to a meeting about esprit de corps?
Yeah, Nicole, it's a tough question. What I'd say is, first of all, you know, I put myself in the position, I take myself back a couple of years when I was still wearing the uniform and say, how would I approach this? And what I'd say is those military leaders, the 800 or so, not only the 1 stars through 4 stars from all over the world, but also their senior enlisted advisors, and probably parts of their commo teams and their security details are going to be descending on Washington. I put myself in that kind of situation and say, what would I be thinking? And I would have to adapt because this thing has changed so many times over the last couple of days. The first time that Secretary Hegseth announced it, it was going to be about the warrior ethos. And the warrior ethos, when it's defined and you know about it, it's a part of the oath to the Constitution, the values and credos of the various services, and something called the warrior ethos, which consists of 4 parts. I won't go into that now. So, okay, we can talk about that. It seems a little bit bizarre to have so many people coming into a room for the secretary to be talking about something like that. But then it evolved a little bit more when the Pentagon said the real plans were for, in fact, a leak from the Pentagon said it's about getting horses into the stables and whipping them into shape. That's very condescending and a little bit diabolical in my terms. And then over the weekend on Saturday, the president said, yeah, okay, if you're going to have everybody here, I want to talk to them too. It turned from a 1-hour meeting that seemed a little bit bizarre to probably multiple hours if you're going to have the president talking based on what we've seen in terms of how he speaks to various audiences. So going back to your question of how would I feel, I would feel this would be, especially if I was coming from Europe or the Indo-Pacific region, I would be saying it's a long run for a short slide, as they say in baseball. You know, a couple of, almost a day on the road to get to a place where we're going to hear people talk to us. And it seems to have nothing to do with national security strategy or the status of the force. If it's about esprit de corps, you know, I hate to put this in stark terms, but many people say the U.S. military is the best in the world. We have very good esprit de corps. So I'm not sure what is going to go on. It's a big question. I don't know how I would have prepared for it if I was still wearing the uniform, other than to say I got to keep a stoic approach and a poker face when I go into this auditorium at Quantico.
How heavily is it weighing on the men and women of the military and their families that whether the federal agents roaming the streets of American cities are actually military, they all look to the American people and any tourists in these big cities like soldiers. And again, whether or not the plans to bomb and obliterate fishing boats off Venezuela without evidence that they're actually drug carriers is happening in the name of the military. I mean, what they're doing under Trump and Hegseth is one bucket of things. What Trump and Hegseth are allowing people to see as militarized operations is another. How is that weighing on the military?
Well, you know, I listened to your last half hour, Nicole, and it was excellent in terms of the various commentary from different people. But I'll tell you, as a person who wore the cloth of our country for 40 years, you know, all I could think back on is the number of lessons I've received on why we do the things the way we do them. In the period leading up to the Revolutionary War, colonists objected to the kinds of things you were talking about over the last half hour, the arbitrary arrest, the confinement without trial, and the use of general warrants, which were called writs of assistance at the time. So they put them into our Constitution. and they're called different things under the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendment. But getting again back to your question, all the actions are troublesome, because talking about using, as the president said, full force in Portland, Oregon, is contrary to what the military believes. That's not what we do. We do not use full force against our fellow citizens unless there's some type of insurrection like there was during the Civil War. Full force is for the police department. And to get more into your question, what I'm most concerned about is I see the films of these different cities where ICE agents and federal agents and police officers really have a militarized approach using MRAP vehicles and kitted up with helmets and armored vests and using long rifles. That to me, when you talk about bringing the military into the streets of the city, most citizens don't know the difference between these people in those kind of uniforms versus the uniforms of the military that we wear.
Yeah, and I mean,
Kimmel won this battle. We've all seen that now. There are still some problems in the wider war. Activists do view the huge American pressure on Disney as a playbook for a range of future Trump clashes, which can go beyond free speech. But to begin our special report right now, remember, here's how it went down.
ABC has just announced that they are pulling late-night host Jimmy Kimmel's show off the air indefinitely.
These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC.
All they do is hit Trump. They're licensed. They're not allowed to do that.
The recent increase in searches for the phrase cancel Disney Plus since ABC suspended Kimmel's show.
people spoke with their pocketbooks. They canceled Disney Plus and their Hulu subscriptions. All of it contributed to the fact that after only 6 days after being suspended, Jimmy Kimmel is returning to the airwaves.
This show is not important. What is important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this.
Many agreed. Kimmel is back because people stood up, and that made Disney respond. Of course, this began with Disney as a company that was clearly most worried about the U.S. government hurting its bottom line. And then, because of you and the people, Disney quickly found it was actually even more worried about its customers. Now remember, the richest, most powerful companies in the U.S. usually are quite rich and powerful because they operate in many different places. And those different countries have different laws and different systems of government. So when we hear that term, multinational companies, it's not just a description of where they operate. It's also a description of the different ways they have to operate. Because a company that wants to operate in China and the U.S. and Canada is going to have some different policies. On the business side, they tend to defend that. But what we just lived through in America shows the sad limits of that kind of capitalist approach. Now, Americans may not see this very much when it happens abroad, but many of these companies already have long histories of accommodating all kinds of autocratic leaders who have very different demands than, say, going to Canada and just running a theme park and paying your taxes. Russia and China are a little different. And that means we already know that these companies in the U.S. that are now facing more free speech and autocratic pressure under Trump than they did previously already know how, and sometimes do, undercut the values of free expression and the rule of law. They claim to follow them, of course, and some of them do more than others. But when you go abroad, it's pretty clear. Disney was not new to the process of quickly bending to a government demand if they thought that the leader was quite serious about making them do it or paying for it. Indeed, for the powerful government of China, it has previously altered and censored films to ensure its position there. It's also made deals under duress. It had the blockbuster Mulan, which led to a deal with the autocratic, no-democracy Chinese government, where Disney took the government's push to also get the rights to 2 Chinese films and open a theme park as part of the deal to stream that movie at all. Other companies have changed or censored references to Taiwan because the Chinese government wants to exert control over what people in and near China think and hear about Taiwan and its quest for more autonomy. Take Apple. Just last year, it pulled WhatsApp and Threads from the China App Store. that was under a government order. Apple would say they have to follow law in China, just like they have to follow law in the U.S. But that certainly is different from supporting free expression. Or Putin plays tough. Google and Apple also removed a voting app that was associated with the opposition against Putin in 2021. These are companies that want to operate everywhere. And again, to be clear and fair, some of them say they would argue it's better in many of these countries to have some tech and some Western media than none. But the point is, as we become more like a country that wants to censor or have the government decide what you can see on TV, as a guest put it tonight, these companies have some experience doing this for years.
Companies fear there is a lot of money left to lose when it comes to China. Marriott Hotels firing an hourly employee just for liking a tweet about free Tibet.
Google and Apple blocked Russians from downloading the main opposition party's app.
A voting app that's linked to Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny.
Really big, rich, powerful American companies. But in this case, they are doing the work of the Putin government to shut down the political opposition in Russia.
That is how it has worked. And so for people inside the U.S. who were somewhat surprised, angry, outraged that Disney, a company that says it is about free expression, that owns a big news organization, that does fund and release a lot of art and expression and comedy and criticism, people were surprised to see Disney do it. And that may be because they were thinking of U.S. Disney or U.S. Disney pre-MAGA. But Disney abroad, Disney in China, Disney in Russia, tech companies in Russia, that might feel a little different. And for those following, it's not new. And there are artists who work with these companies but have also spoken out because they've been concerned about the global effect on human rights and free expression. Take the famed director-writer Judd Apatow, who told us this.
What I perceive as more chilling is a corporate type of censorship that people don't really notice, which is a lot of these giant corporate entities have business with countries around the world, Saudi Arabia or China, and they're just not going to criticize them, and they're not going to let their shows criticize them, or they're not going to air documentaries that go deep into truthful areas because they just make so much money.
Facts. Judd Apatow was saying that while working with some of those companies. That, like Kimmel, is a type of intellectual fortitude, to call it out. And his point there was subtle and had nothing to do with the current issues around MAGA. He was speaking back then, 2020, about what he called that insidious type of expression corruption, that you don't see the documentary, that it doesn't get made or it doesn't get streamed. And so the agenda of Saudi Arabia and China doesn't just work over there. We don't control, and they have country autonomy, but that it affects us here as well. Affects all of us. Now, Hollywood still talks a lot about free expression, artistic expression. The Motion Picture Association leader wrote in 2016, the First Amendment right to free speech undergirds all other right, whether it's confronting tyrants abroad, which is the subject right now that we're discussing, quote, or pushing the limits and buttons of our society's cultural understanding. Motion pictures and TV often dare to say the unspeakable. Hear, hear. That's Chris Dodd, the former senator, and he was representing Hollywood's interests. But Hollywood's interests morph depending on where they are, as I'm telling you. And so abroad, not so much. China is also now the largest movie market in the world. So a lot of films need to do some business there if they want to be global blockbusters. One producer saying studios might not even pursue an idea if they think it will make the Chinese government mad. That's that preemptive chilling effect, inhibiting filmmakers from using any storyline that might offend Chinese officials. Number one, that's a problem. Number two, if Trump's FCC gets its way, the problem over there will be more of a problem here. Here's how one Disney executive put it.
We're in the movie business, and we're making movies that are designed to be seen by an appreciative, hopefully, audience that will enjoy our movie. We don't wish to be political, and to get dragged into a political discussion, I would argue, is sort of inherently unfair. It's not what we do. We're not politicians. It's not what we do. We're not a governmental organization. We're making movies.
It is unfair. But that dragging that China is doing and that other American politicians may want to do, Brendan Carr certainly sees his role in the government as deciding what's on your TV, even though he had a big loss. That dragging may be unavoidable if you are in a country where the government wants to control free expression in the companies, wants to grind down the opposition, not just the people who self-identify as the opposition, but others who might just make art or even jokes that the government decides are over their line. And so some of these companies are understandably on the defense. Some, and I say this with all seriousness, are dealing with international law. And so when you operate over there, you generally have to comply with those laws. But there are still lines and tough questions, because Disney could have said, well, we think this is what we got to do under what the FCC's current view of the law is. That was kind of where they started. But very quickly, they found a different energy, which is maybe we could win this fight in court, and it's not the law yet. Now, Netflix, widely respected company, supported a lot of arts, a lot of documentaries. They did pull one episode of Hasan Minhaj's comedy show in 2019 under threat from Saudi Arabia. Again, a legal threat, which said, well, they'd have to deal with that in that country. The comedian had raised questions about the infamous killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, Disney is concerned about the government above. It was also concerned about some companies below, although it won that fight with the affiliates late last week. The legal consequences, though, from fighting with Donald Trump, from backing Kimmel's rights, this could play out further. Here was what Kimmel said.
I've had the opportunity to meet and spend time with comedians and talk show hosts from countries like Russia, countries in the Middle East, who tell me they would get thrown in prison for making fun of those in power, and worse than being thrown in prison. They know how lucky we are here. Our freedom to speak is what they admire most about this country. The government threat to silence a comedian the president doesn't like is anti-American. That's anti-American. And I am so glad we have some solidarity on that.
There's plenty of talk about what is wrong with America. A lot of our politics, which have a negative, divisive hue, are about that and flying accusations. Let me tell you something positive, to echo Jimmy Kimmel. We saw a lot of people agree on something that is right about America, free speech and free expression. But when they went to the multinationals, they didn't have 100% agreement. They had to rise up and fight to vindicate that First Amendment right, which so many Americans across time, space, and ideology have come to agree is the better way to do it.